This podcast is part of the Michigan Sports and Entertainment Podcast Network. Go to michigansportsandentertainment.com for more great podcasts.
Welcome to MSE Countdown with your host, David Rosenberg and Chase Sussex. The countdown starts now.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Michigan Sports and Entertainment Countdown. I'm your host, David Rosenberg. I'm here with my co-host, Chase Sussex. Chase, what's up?
Yo, what's going on, everybody?
It's been, I think we missed last week because we both couldn't record, so we missed the Lions and Chiefs game, but it's been a pretty eventful week, despite the bye that the Lions had this Sunday. So let's hop right into it. Our first story, obviously the Lions, they are, am I right, 2-1-1?
Yes, they are 2-1-1.
So obviously that Chiefs game was a tough loss to bear, I think, for any Lions fan. But let's talk a little bit about the fallout from it, because I know the reaction has been kind of mixed. There was your, I don't want to say typical Lions fan, but you know, it seems pretty common that people are going to get upset with the Lions for any loss that they suffer. And then there was the optimistic fan who saw this kind of how I saw it, in that it was a game where they tested one of the best offenses in the league and they put up some offense of their own. So I thought it was a pretty good all-around game despite the loss. But how'd you feel following the Chiefs game?
I felt really similar. I think there were a lot of things that, you know, the Lions didn't do well, but I also think there were a lot of things that the Lions did do well. I think the number one thing I really think they did was gain a lot of respect from the nation itself, or just, you know, the national coverage of the Lions. I think just improved in general, because they did in that game. They challenged the Chiefs in that football game. Defensively, they really didn't play as strong as they probably could have, giving up 34 points in that game. But I think offensively, they did. You know, it was the best game that they had this season on offense, and you know, they just gained some notoriety. I think people are just take the Lions a little bit more seriously this year. I think after the tie, especially early in the season, a lot of people were, you know, discounting the Lions and saying that they really didn't have a shot at anything this year. And I think they really proved a lot of people wrong. I know a lot of people have the Lions in playoff conversation, and they deservedly, you know, they deserve to be in those conversations. I think the Lions have sort of established themselves as a legit football team who, you know, are getting sort of things under control. They'll start getting healthy, and they'll get guys back on their defensive line, which I think is the strength of their the strength of their team. Really is their defensive line and their strong defensive core. You know, and they'll start getting back some of those guys. They'll get back Hawkinson. You'll see Slay and Diggs back this week as well. Potentially Deshaun Hand. You probably won't see Mike Daniels back, but having Deshaun Hand back will be, you know, a big improvement. I just think, you know, the Lions are taking a step in the right direction. I think, like I said, they gained a lot of respect from people just everywhere, and they look like a legit football team. They did a lot of things right in that game. So I think that it was a really good game in all aspects, despite the fact they lost, even though I think they probably could have come out with a win. Honestly, right now, this football team looks like they could be 4-0, and I really think it bodes well for the rest of their season. I think realistically they have a good shot to win every single one of their games that they play in the future on their upcoming schedule, and I feel confident to say that. I mean, there's not a single opponent that they play that they're out of that, you know, supposedly out of that game before they play it. I think a lot of people did view that the Chiefs game as that. A lot of people said, "Oh, there's no way the Lions will ever win this game," and they didn't, but it was dang close. So I think a lot of people, you know, are starting to respect the Lions, and personally, I love it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, you know, you remember at the beginning of the season that there was that 3-13 prediction. I don't remember.
Oh
which
yeah,
publication did it, but
it was ESPN. They had 3-13. They had Lions going 0-11 and firing Matt Patricia to begin the season, and then finishing 3-13. No, I think, and USA Today had him at 3-13 as well.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up USA Today, because I saw a power rankings from USA Today immediately after that game that I think put the Lions in like the top 5 in the NFL.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. They had them at like 4 or something like that in the top 5, and originally they had them in the bottom of the league, in the bottom 5. So I just think that's crazy how quick a turnaround they had. And you know, I think it's you know, people are hopping on the bandwagon, and for me, it's a little bit dumb because they didn't have faith in the Lions before the season started, and they shouldn't have faith in the Lions now. They shouldn't be hopping on their bandwagon. They don't deserve to celebrate any kind of championship that they didn't think that the Lions would even come close to getting. So I was gonna say, you were either there before the season or you weren't there at all now. So at least that's just my mindset behind it. But it's nice to see some, the Lions getting some notoriety just nationally and just people talking about them and saying that they're contenders. I mean, that's something we haven't heard from a Lions football team in a long time, at least since 2014, back when they had that supposed top 5 defense in the league.
Let's talk about Detroit, kind of in the bigger picture, right? It's the fifth week of the season, but Detroit's played 4 games, and we can call this definitely the quarter point of the season. I know it's still a little early because football's such a fluid game. I mean, the later weeks kind of count more because players start to break down. Taking so many snaps just starts to put the wear and tear on bodies, and that's when you start to see good teams in the first half kind of fall off. It's entirely possible that a team can win 6 or 7 games in the first 8 games and only scrape together 2 or 3 in the second half. So where do you? I mean, obviously we both have an optimistic view of the Lions, but so far, who has impressed you most? And I guess on the other hand of that, who is concerning you at this point?
So I'd have to say my biggest, I would say probably my biggest performer that I've seen at least is just Matthew Stafford. I know a lot of people, it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I know a lot of people before the season said this had to be Stafford's redemption year, and I really do think he's redeemed himself. The whole offense entirely just looks different. Stafford's got a new playbook around him. He's adapting really well to Darrell Bevell's offense, which I really like. I just think everything looks good on more aspects. Kerryon Johnson is running the ball much better, had an 100-yard rush against the Chiefs, and that opened up the pass game as well. Stafford was really able to excel in that game, and I think he looked really good. So I would say he has definitely he's shown a lot of improvement since last season, and honestly, he looks great. I mean, the dude looks like he's in the prime of his career at 31, and he looks like he could go for another 10 years. I think a lot of people talked about in the offseason the fact that he might be getting down to his last couple years, but honestly, I think he's got a lot left in him. He's got a lot left in the tank. So I think he is sort of my biggest improvement and just someone that I've noticed the most. And otherwise, I think as a bad, I mean, there really hasn't been much bad. I haven't really noticed too many issues. The offensive line has been okay. They went 2 straight weeks without a sack. They have a couple against the Chiefs, but it was definitely much improved. So I think the offensive line is nothing to hate on there. I would say the Lions' special teams has not been the greatest. I know Jamal Agnew had sort of a bounce back week with that punt return touchdown, but otherwise I think just tackling and stuff like that on special teams and penalties has been an issue. Part of me wants to say that I don't know. I think Matt Patricia's time management has been one of the things that's been a little bit frustrating for me. I think he still really doesn't know how to manage time. I think he did do something well in the Chiefs game. It was a little bit controversial, I'm going to say, because I know a lot of people. He called a timeout on that last drive where the Chiefs scored a touchdown. They were on the 3-yard line. The clock was running, and he called a timeout. And people were like, "Well, why would you call a timeout?" They had a decent amount of time left on the clock, and he wanted to give Stafford more time to put a ball in the end zone. So I think it was really smart there. I think he definitely did redeem himself. There wasn't too much. There's really not too much bad on this football team that I'm seeing right now that I can really list as a negative. There's just besides maybe some poor special teams play. I think that's about. I can't pinpoint anything bad on a specific player, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no. Patricia is a good mention by you because the time management is really important in football, and I think that in the Lions loss to the Chiefs, and even in the tie to Arizona, and even in some of the wins, there have been questionable timeouts, questionable decisions, kind of letting up on the gas, so to speak, that you wonder about, what's actually being said when they're talking to the coach and stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how they go through the next 3 quarters of the season and see if they remedy that, because that's certainly something that can be fixed just by, the coach should be aware of his mistakes, and I'm sure he is. But you also mentioned the offensive line, and, I'm looking here online, and in 2014, Stafford had took 45 sacks, 2015, 44, 2016, 37, 2017, 47, and 2018, 40. So he's pretty much been over 40 sacks for the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they've had some rough games, like I think they gave up 4 sacks in the Chiefs game and 3 in the first game against the Cardinals, but that adds up to 7, and if you extrapolate that and do a little bit of math, it looks like it's going to be closer to 30 sacks this season, which 10 to 12 less hits on a quarterback is a really big deal. So I think that's a positive to look at when you're looking at the offensive line, even though Decker has had some trouble, which is you don't want your tackle being the name that everyone knows for a bad reason. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. And that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And as far as I'll give my, my star and my not so star, I guess the thing that I've liked the most, I totally agree with you, it is Matthew Stafford. He's been super impressive. I can't give you the stats right now, but it just seems he's throwing for, near 300 or above 300 every single game. He's throwing multiple touchdowns. Did you see that one, the Galladay touchdown that he snuck between 4 defenders against the Chiefs?
Absolutely, yeah. That was a hard touchdown to miss.
That went viral.
That was really good. Mm-hmm. That was big, and that got noticed, nationally, which I think is important. And I think that's really good. There's a couple stats I want to bring up here about the Lions. The Lions offense ranks 8th in the league through 4 weeks, with 387.5 yards per game. Through 4 weeks, ranks 10th in passing yards per game with 267. And actually, they're averaging 120.5 rushing yards per game, which actually ranks 10th in the league. And they have 24. They're averaging 24.3 points per game, which also ranks 10th in the league. So I think it's just definitely interesting to see the types of stats that the Lions have here. They look really strong on offense. I think there's a lot of just things that they just look really good. Matthew Stafford ranks 10th in passing yards, 5th in passing touchdowns, at least in the last game that he played, and he has a average passer rating of 102.6 in the season, which is really good. I mean, he looks fantastic so far this year. Just a huge improvement from where he was last year, and I think a lot of that does come down to play calling. I think Darrell Bevell does, deserve a lot of credit in that sense. He's done a lot to sort of revitalize the offense. The run game looks better. The passing game looks better. And just overall execution looks really good. So I think the Lions should be proud of where they're at offensively. This is the best they've looked offensively in years. They have a run game and they have a pass game, which you can't say has happened since the 90s, back when you had Barry Sanders, and their pass game was still kind of meh back then too. So, I think definitely this is like the best the Lions have looked offensively in years, which is only a good sign.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up this stat because it kind of segues into my, not so good on the Lions through the quarter mark of the season. And it's not necessarily that I don't like Kerryon Johnson or what he's doing, but I think that there's a lot to be desired. He only has 1 touchdown on the season. He's only gone over 100 yards in 1 game. That was against Kansas City. He got about 5 yards a carry, and he put up 125. And he's not bad. If you're a fantasy player, I think he's like in the top 20 of fantasy running backs. He's good, but I don't know that he's being utilized the correct way. And I know at the beginning of the season there were some questions about how many snaps he was getting, and I think they fixed that obviously with the 26 carries and 125 yards. If you give him the ball, he can do stuff with it, and you've established the pass game with Stafford. So the secondary is going to be playing a little back. They're not going to be able to get up a level when they need to. So I'd like to see more Kerryon Johnson, but I'm not saying that he's been bad. I just think that he could be better, and that's what I'm looking for going into the rest of the season.
No, that's a good point. I think it's definitely interesting. I know Darrell Bevell is sort of a run-first type of coordinator, which is interesting to see the fact that he just really hasn't gotten a lot of reps. And it's interesting that you said he just hasn't been used properly. And I think just going forward, I think you will see some more usage. I know the Lions went into this season, using him more sparingly. But I think now they've gotten rid of C.J. Anderson, and now they're sort of running more of that 2 running back set with Ty Johnson. They've also got J.D. McKissick thrown in there a little bit in the pass game. I think the Lions are going to start using Kerryon Johnson more. I think you'll see, him used more in 3-down situations. which is important. I think, he'll see an upwards of usage in these next couple weeks, at least for me. I'm high on Kerryon Johnson right now just because I see more volume coming in the next couple weeks, because he was a high volume player against the Chiefs. And yeah, the Chiefs run defense is not good, but I mean, that's the kind of approach the Lions want to have in the season. They, their whole offense is, sort of ground and pound and sort of keep the opposing quarterback on the sidelines. And I think that's important. I think they're going to continue with that sort of game plan and thought process going forward.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about the Lions' upcoming game on Monday Night Football next week against the Packers. Now, before we started recording, you described this as a big divisional game, and I semi-disagree, and I know you want to know why, but first let me hear, what's your impression of this game and the weight that it holds?
This is a pretty big game just because I think, the Lions have yet to play a divisional matchup so far this season. And I think there's a lot to prove coming off the game against the Chiefs. I think, the divisional matchups are always big. I think it's going to come in, these games are huge when it comes to later on in the season. This game is at home again. So it'll be big in that sense. They'll need to pick up a nice home victory here in front of Ford Field, who was absolutely rocking in that Chiefs game. So they just need to keep up that intensity. And, like I said, divisional matchups just mean a lot. When it comes down to it, the Packers are probably the best team in the division right now. They played a great game against the Cowboys just this past Sunday. And I just think that there's a lot on the shoulders of this game, the divisional matchups. It always seems like the Lions season comes down to that final sort of game against the Packers towards the end of the season. It could come into effect whether they make or miss the playoffs. And I always take divisional games a little bit more seriously, just because maybe it's the rivalry and that's sort of the fan in me, I guess. And it's just like, I want to win those games more. But I just do think it's important in terms of their playoff implications. The Packers, just in general, are a good football team. They're now 4-1, I believe, on the season, and they're a good football team. The Lions, is going to take a lot for the Lions to beat them, and I think but the Lions do have the tool set. They have the ability to beat the Packers, and that's why I think it's such an important matchup, just because of the strength of the opponent that they're playing. It's the environment. They're at home. I'm sure they're going into that game as the underdog, but I think the Lions like being the underdog heading into the game, and I think they sort of have that chip on their shoulder against Green Bay. They're looking for a win after coming up just short against the Chiefs. Just something about it is just, the divisional game for me is just so much more important because you really only get 6 of those, and this is their first big test this season besides the Chiefs, their first big divisional test in a tough division. And if they really want to prove that they're playoff contenders, then they need to show that they can hold their own with some of the strong teams in the division, because the NFC North is, in my opinion, the toughest division in the league. The Bears have the number 1 defense in the league. I think the Packers are one of the best all-around teams in the division. I know they've had a rough passing game, but I know Dalvin Cook is literally one of the most electric running backs in the NFL right now. The Minnesota's defense is nothing to shy away from either. I mean, they are a good team as well. So this division is definitely not a pushover. So I think a big win over the Packers will sort of solidify themselves as contenders in terms of being able to be a playoff contender this year.
I agree with everything that you just said, and I'm not stupid. I'm never going to take the Packers lightly because, Aaron Rodgers is not a man to be denied. Mm-hmm. But watching football over the past 5 weeks, I want to say that the Packers scare me the least in the division.
Really?
And that's why, okay, so this week, Aaron Jones, the Packers running back, he had a pretty solid game. And he
4 touchdowns, yeah.
He looked like he could not
solid.
Be stopped. Yeah. But I think that won't be the case against the Lions. I think the Cowboys were just sort of exposed in that regard. I mean,
I agree. Mm-hmm.
I just really think that Detroit's going to handle that a lot better, and it's going to come down to Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers does have, he's a great quarterback. He'll always be a great quarterback, but I don't know. I just feel like his tools are less scary than they've been in a long time. And I have a lot of faith that the Lions are going to win this. So that's kind of why I'm taking it a little lighter than you. I think it's certainly a big game if the Lions lose, which is kind of a bad way to look at it. But I kind of expect them to win and solidify what we were just talking about, that people are starting to show them respect, and it will increase that respect when they win. So, I guess it's wrong for me to say that it's not a big divisional game because I'm adding a lot of implication to it. But for me, I just see this as another week, not the biggest game of the season, and not the toughest opponent that they're going to see. I think that the Vikings actually scare me the most. I know that defense in Chicago is really good, but I'm just not a Trubisky guy. I don't think that I think you need a strong quarterback to lead a team to a divisional win, and I'm not sure that he's the guy to do it. And I know there's been those problems in the passing game in Minnesota, but they're the team that scare me the most because if you watch this week, Kirk Cousins lit it up. He got berated by somebody. Yeah, I think so.
No, yeah, he had a great game. And that's the thing. I mean, if Kirk Cousins gets back on track, it's scary. It really is, because the defense is good, and Dalvin Cook has already proved he's a top 5 running back in the league this year. If not for me, I think he's top 3. He's been one of the most.
Who do you put in that top 3?
It's Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, that's number 1.
Dalvin Cook, and I'm trying to think of the third. I guess
Kamara's been hurt with value.
Yeah, Kamara has been kind of hurt. Saquon's been hurt too, so it's a little bit tough to say there. God, that's tough. I'm not really sure who else I have in my top 3. I'm trying to think of who else.
It's probably a really obvious answer that we're not looking at.
Really?
I'm sure there is, but I don't know.
Yeah, I know Chris Carson has been very good this season. He's played really well. Todd Gurley sort of had an up and down year. It's tough. There's really not. For me, I don't know. I mean, probably Ezekiel Elliott's another one as well. He's had a good year, but
and I think Melvin
Josh
Gordon's
Jacobs
pick
another
it up
one
too.
as well from. What was that?
Melvin Gordon, I think he's going to pick it up too.
Yeah, Melvin Gordon, Josh Jacobs from the Raiders. And that's another thing I wanted to point out. We talked about the Bears defense, but the Raiders showed in that game that the Bears defense can be beaten. The Raiders actually did come out with a win. They had a late touchdown at the end there by Josh Jacobs that actually won them the game 27-24. And it shows that the Bears defense can be beaten. Their offense was on the field for a long time. They kept Chase Daniels and the Bears offense off of the field for most of that game. And I think that was important. They tired the Bears defense out, and they ended up grinding and winning that game. The Raiders being a pretty, uneventful team this year. Derek Carr has been very iffy, but Josh Jacobs has been the highlight of that team, and the offense got the job done. They really did. And I think that shows that the Bears defense is beatable. The Packers, they're without Devontae Adams this Monday. At least I'm assuming. He still has turf toe. He hasn't been completely ruled out. But the Packers we're expecting him to miss multiple weeks, and he did miss last week. He was already ruled out like days before their matchup on Sunday Night Football. So if he misses this week, I think the Packers are significantly hurt again in that aspect. But if they can shut down Aaron Jones, I think Aaron Rodgers looked less than impressive in that game against the Cowboys. I think Aaron Jones was sort of the face of that team. So I think the Lions have been pretty good at shutting down the run this year, and I think if they can continue to do that and can contain Aaron Jones, I think you're right. I think the Vikings do provide the biggest test for the Lions this season if Kirk Cousins can get his game together. That's definitely a strong point. I didn't really think about that, but now the more you mention it, the Vikings do sound like the scariest team that the Lions will play despite a 3-2 record. So
yeah, they just look like the most complete team, and I like what you said about the Bears is correct. That they did get exposed by the Raiders. That defense can be beaten, but I'm not one to buy into like the superstition type deal thing. But that was the game in London, right?
Yes, that was the game in London.
I got to imagine that throws the players off because it feels like something wacky always happens. Like it's like a neutral site. It just kind of throws everything out of whack. So, the Bears defense is still nothing to be played with. But I think that the Vikings are just the strongest team in the division, even more so than the Lions right now, honestly. In that first, I don't know what week they play the Vikings, but that Vikings-Lions first matchup is going to be probably the biggest game in my book for the Lions this season, assuming that Detroit beats Green Bay this week. Because if they don't beat Green Bay, lots of hope, lots of respect gets lost. So for me, this is like a must-win almost.
Yeah, no, So Actually, the game this week for the Lions is actually in Green Bay, so I was mistaken. It's actually at Lambeau this week, but they play Minnesota right after Green Bay, so they play at Lambeau on Monday night, and then they go next Sunday to Minnesota.
So
They're actually at home against Minnesota. Yeah, so they'll have a short week against Minnesota. Yep.
Yeah, that's the scary part to me. If the Lions go 2-0 over the next 2 weeks, which take 1 week at a time, you know what I mean. But if they manage to take out both the Packers and the Vikings, I think they look incredibly strong. I mean, obviously they will. They'll be 4-1-1. So
yes, they'll be 4-1-1 if they win the next 2 weeks, with solid divisional wins over the Packers and the Vikings. I mean, the Lions will be poised to be a very good football team if they can win over the next 2 weeks. I mean, they will. I think they've got a good shot at being one of the top teams in the NFC this year if they can knock off those two big divisional matchups, those tough divisional matchups by any strong suit. So it's definitely the next 2 weeks have big implications for the Lions for sure, and that's why I think these divisional games are so important.
Real quick, we talked about the Lions a lot. Is there any one storyline or something going on in the rest of the league that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so actually that's interesting that you brought that up. There was a lot of people talked about this date's going all the way back to last year. If you remember when the Lions played the Rams last season, I believe the Rams did end up winning that game, but it holds comparisons to the Chiefs game. So if you notice what happened last year against the Rams, the Lions are a heavy zone defense team. They play a lot of zone defense, and that's just the kind of defense that Patricia and Pasqualoni like to play. It's where they're comfortable. It's a good scheme fit. What they did against the Rams, they basically, the Rams had reviewed film of the Lions defense. Said, okay, we're gonna play zone. We're gonna attack zone. That's how we practice this week. Well, Patricia was like, well, we're gonna play man defense. And it threw Jared Goff completely off kilter, and he had a really bad game. And Todd Gurley basically why the Rams won that football game. And the Rams have not looked the same since that game last year. Sure, they went to the Super Bowl last year, but they scored 3 points against the Patriots. And the Patriots used that same scheme. They primarily played zone defense, and they switched to man, and you saw how much Jared Goff struggled, and they won the Super Bowl. So. And I think it's similar to what we've seen against the Chiefs. Again, the Lions played zone defense, so the Chiefs and Mahomes prepared for zone defense. And they got met with man defense. And they struggled. Mahomes did not throw for a passing touchdown in that game. Like I said, the running game was basically what undid the Lions in that football game. I believe they had 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns in that football game. So, yeah, they had a lot. So... that's eventually what undid the Lions. But, I mean, they held Mahomes without a passing touchdown despite giving up 315 yards in the air. They were unable to – Mahomes was unable to pass for a touchdown. And you saw it again this next week. The Colts played the Chiefs. The Colts, a team who primarily, again, plays zone defense, switched it up and played man and ended up beating the Chiefs this week 19-13 on Sunday Night Football. So it just goes to show you how – certain preparations, a lot of people are saying that the Lions are opening a lot of other teams' eyes. They're playing very smart. The game plan going in is defensively, at least, has been so good. And they're fooling teams, and that's the kind of thing that that the Patriots have done for the longest time. And Patricia's executing it so well. He exposed the Rams, and I think he exposed the Chiefs this year. And the Chiefs came close to losing last week, and they won, and they lost this. It goes to show you that the play calling and the scheme that the Lions are running, they're clearly doing something right, and they're exposing specific quarterbacks in the league. And I think that's the biggest sort of story I've seen so far with the Lions. They've just schemed so well against their opponents, and everyone knows how good at and as Matthew Stafford is at watching tape and reviewing film and. He's played a great year this year. He's been so good at finding, little windows and exposing defenses. And that's the kind of stuff, if they keep it up, the Lions will be serious contenders again this year, I think, because just the way they game plan, the way they scheme for each game, I think is so important. So
yeah, and it's an innovative way of, play calling because
Mhm.
It's interrupting. You mentioned the Rams last year, the Chiefs this year. It's interrupting strong offenses, and it's showing. It you could say that it led to the Colts' victory last night.
I would
And
say, yeah.
yeah, and it opens the door. And when you have a mind like that, I mean, that's why some of the I give Patricia a pass on some of those time management issues, because there's something going on in his head, and he obviously, obviously you mentioned Stafford, and there's other people reviewing film and making input on these kind of plays, but there's something going on in his head that's at a higher level than we can kind of process. So, I think that's a really good point. And interestingly enough, we only have 2 unbeatens left through week 5. It's the Patriots and the 49ers haven't lost yet, but they're playing Monday night. So by the time we put this episode out on Tuesday, that could also be, an unbeaten that's fallen. So lots of parity in the league this year, and that's a good sign, that even the best players like Pat Mahomes can make a splash and be figured out. So let's move on to the second story of the day. We can talk about some college football. Michigan defeated Iowa on Saturday, right?
Yes, it was a somewhat underwhelming win, but I'd say it was a pretty big win. I think I don't really know necessarily what it means for Michigan going forward. I'm still really not buying into that football team. I think there's still a lot of glaring issues with Michigan, but I think the number one thing is just the fact that I think the defense played really well. Nate Stanley, who's the starting quarterback for the Iowa Hawkeyes, hadn't thrown a single interception headed in that game, and he threw 3 against Michigan. He looked incredibly uncomfortable in the pocket against Michigan, and they only allowed 3 points of offense. I mean, they played really, really well. Offensively, I know is a really big issue. I know you want to kind of dive into that. I'll let you talk about it. So, what were some of the issues that you saw on offense? Because I know the defense looked really well, but the offense, I should say, did not look as good.
Well, I tuned into the game on Saturday around like the middle of the third quarter, so I didn't watch all of it. But if you look at the season, right, I think one of the biggest problems, I'm not just going to say Shea Patterson, I'm just going to call it the quarterback situation. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, there's several quarterbacks, and no one's really sure which one's the best at this point. And Patterson just doesn't look comfortable, and he's not delivering. I mean, you scored 10 points, against Iowa, who is, a fair team and stuff. But this was this Michigan team was supposed to be a strong offense. They were supposed to, score a lot of points and beat a lot of teams and put up a fight against Ohio State. And like you said, I'm not sold on this team at all. And 10 points to me is a really big deal, because this just feels like a game that they should have not blown out of the water, but put up some stats and recovered, and they aren't recovering in any sense of it, right? Like, Harbaugh has as many questions surrounding him and his job after this week, I think, than he did, when they lost. So, Army was tough. I just think, you had Patterson, I think, fumble 3 times, or the offense fumbled 3 times in the first half of that Army game. So it's just all around the offense seems to not understand what they're supposed to be doing, and I think that boils down to a leadership deal, right? You need a leader on the offense, and I don't think Patterson has gotten the nod, so to speak, from not only the fans but the team in general to say, like, you're our guy, we're sticking to you, right? Like, think about the Lions. It helps a lot with Matthew Stafford being that quarterback. Like, for me, he's thrown over 4,000 yards, 5,000 yards several times. I trust him. Like, we live and die by him, for lack of a better term. And I just feel like you went into the seasons with questions about how Shea Patterson could be, and those questions haven't gone away. And it's just really disheartening for me. I mean, that's why I didn't tune in until the third quarter. I just don't have this urge to wake up and watch Michigan football on Saturdays, because it's, it's. I mean, obviously, we've talked about this before. I'm a UCF fan first and a Michigan fan second, but UCF has had a rough season similar to Michigan's season. I would compare the two teams. They've fallen in the rankings. They've lost close games that they probably should have blown the other team out of the water in, and they have like a win here or there under their belt that makes you think, oh, they are pretty good. But it's just that feeling for me overall.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand where you're coming from. And I think it's just what we were promised to begin the season. I mean, there was a lot of hype around Michigan. I feel that there is always a lot of hype around Michigan to begin the season. And I think we talked about this in the previous episode, just the fact that there is a lot of hype around. There was so much hype around Michigan's offense, especially new offensive coordinator, Gaddis, and just the fact that his whole supposed speed and space offense that he was supposed to implement. And the Michigan just looks like they refused to throw the ball downfield. Shea Patterson looks comfortable. The offense is not what we were promised in the offseason. And I think that's very unfortunate. They're not airing the ball. They have multiple talented receivers. They have Donovan Peoples-Jones. Have Tariq Black. They have Nico Collins. And
to be fair, DPJ has had some injuries, right? He's been limited this season.
Mm-hmm. But regardless, they still have talent in their wide receiver core. And it's disappointing that they just refuse to use it. And just the execution is just not used properly. And I just feel, you got to feel for those receivers. I mean, I'm sure they're wanting to get the ball. And Nico Collins did have a nice catch in that game against Iowa, but I think it was like they had like 6 deep targets in that entire game. I mean, there's just not enough deep passing in that football game.
What do you do? Like, how do you what if you're Jim Harbaugh? How do you address this quarterback situation? Obviously, there are people on the internet defending Patterson, attacking him. What do you do?
The scheme is a really big issue, but I think it is Patterson. Part of me wants to move on to Dylan McCaffrey and just see what he can do. I know Dylan McCaffrey is currently dealing with a concussion. He's still in concussion protocol, to my knowledge. So it doesn't look like he's an option right now, but it doesn't look like Joe Milton is an option either. And I think it's frustrating because Shea Patterson he just doesn't look like himself right now. And, the offense was supposed to be built around what he can do, and he isn't taking full advantage of that. And I think, and the play calling just needs to improve. As much as Shea Patterson has not looked good, I mean, the play calling has been so bad. And that's on Harbaugh, and that's on Gaddis, and whoever else it's on. I mean, they just need to fix it. They need to figure out a way to utilize the wide receivers. The wide receivers Donovan Peoples-Jones, Nico Collins, and Tariq Black have no issue gaining separation. If you've seen them in previous football games, they're some of the fastest guys. Donovan Peoples-Jones is debatably the fastest player on Michigan's entire roster. So there's no issue with speed. They can get separation. The wide receivers don't have any issues getting open, but it's just executing the passes and putting Shea Patterson in a position to where he can air the ball down the field, because he has the ability to do it. We've seen it in previous years, and he's just not doing it. The play calling is an issue, and Shea Patterson is an issue as well.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail directly on the head there, that it's the abundance of receivers that really exposes Patterson in this situation, right? We know he can air the ball out. We know he has made these throws in the past. And when you have a core of, several good, strong receivers who can get good release, who can get separation, typically one of them is going to be beating the man who's covering him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you aren't getting the stats that these guys should be getting, you have to look at the quarterback, because it just means that reads are getting missed. Spots aren't getting hit. He throws the ball and it's just not what it used to be, I guess. And I do think it's time to move on. Obviously, you have McCaffrey is in the concussion protocol, so that's iffy. But when he's healthy, I think that they need to give it a shot.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. Yeah, I think they need to give Dylan McCaffrey a proper chance to run this offense and show what he can do, because he's shown flashes. We've seen some of it. We've seen some of his ability to be able to not only pass the football but run the. Another thing, Shea Patterson looks so uncomfortable in the pocket, he's not able to run the football, and I think that's disappointing. And I'm sure Dylan McCaffrey will be somewhat hesitant to run the football since he just, he was hit in the head. I'll say, not legally, but he was hit in the head during a run play. So he might be a little bit hesitant coming back, but he can run the football. So can Joe Milton, but Joe Milton obviously has a lot of accuracy issues. And I do really like Joe Milton as a prospect. I do. I just think Dylan McCaffrey is the most poised quarterback on the team, on the roster right now to lead the offense.
What year is McCaffrey?
McCaffrey, I believe, is a redshirt freshman.
Okay, so you got, someone who's been in the system for a year, and he's still young and he still has eligibility. I think that when he comes back, I mean, again, I'll compare him to UCF because it's the other college football team that I follow the closest. They had a situation with Brandon Wimbush, who was a transfer from Notre Dame, and Dylan Gabriel. And Gabriel is, I think, a true freshman, maybe a redshirt freshman, but he's one of those kids from Hawaii like Mackenzie Milton. And pretty soon after the first game, they gave each quarterback kind of a tryout in certain parts of the game. And it was clear going forward that Gabriel was the guy that they were going with. And, cutting your losses quick. Obviously, UCF's lost 2 games on the season, so it's not like they're having a dominant, great season like they're supposed to. But as a fan, I'm okay with it because I know the team is good and I know the team's trying to win. And I know that, hey, the starting quarterback got a terrible injury that is going to keep him out of football for over a year. And if he comes back next year, then you have him and this young Dylan Gabriel, right? Like, there is a future beyond Mackenzie Milton. And I just think that if Wolverines fans had that kind of hope, they would be there. But obviously, the expectation, which you mentioned earlier too, is really high. There's that joke that the month before the beginning of the season is the best month for Wolverines fans,
Yeah.
And that's just, you hate to see that on the timeline when you're browsing through Twitter right before the college football season starts. But, I mean, if it's not true, I don't know what is, because every year it seems like this happens. Do you think that Michigan fans should cut their losses at this point and stop expecting so much from Michigan? Or do you think that, I think I know where you're going to go with this, but does Michigan need to, figure out a way to deliver to their fans?
No, I mean, yeah, I don't really know.
It's a pretty terribly worded question, but
yeah, but no, I understand where you're coming from. In terms of cutting their losses, I mean, I think the expectations for Michigan program do need to be lower. We've seen this, the fact that a lot of people are questioning Michigan's playoff contention status. I don't think the Michigan Wolverines are anywhere near contending, being a playoff contention team. I just don't think they're at that position anymore.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is, though, at the beginning of the season, should fans be talking about how we as Michigan fans, like, how are the Wolverines going to get to the playoffs? And I just think that this is one thing I've said, as a UCF fan, is aim lower. Aim for a big bowl game. I just don't, I think that the talk at the beginning of every season is, oh, can they beat Ohio State? If they beat Ohio State, then they're going to go to the playoffs. And it's like,
yeah,
1 week at a time. Like, calm down.
Mm-hmm.
And
no,
let's,
I understand.
Let's get through this. Let's get through 1 week at a time and just win. You just want your team to do well week by week. When you have, it's like when they talk about receivers who dropped the ball because they were already looking to where they were going to run with it, and they didn't keep their eye. Like, keep your eye on the prize, man. Just focus 1 week at a time. I mean, I'm an admitted Harbaugh defender, and even I'm getting sick of the, I don't know what you want to call it, but the circus that practically follows him. I mean, I know that's because of his star status, but it also has to do with his personality. And I just think that if he tempered himself and tempered the Michigan fans, that, a one loss season wouldn't look so bad to everyone.
Not at all. I mean, if you think about it, here's the thing: it's tough to temper the expectations of Michigan fans right now, because Harbaugh was brought in to bring this team to the next caliber.
Yes,
people are having an issue with the fact that Michigan is going 10-3 and making a big bowl game. You know what I mean? Fans won't be, even if you lower the expectations, fans still aren't going to be happy with that, because that's not the caliber of coach that Harbaugh was supposed to be. The hype around the Michigan program and Harbaugh is there for a reason, because his name just draws hype.
But at what point do you stop saying he was supposed to be this and accept that he is who he is? I get if you're, if that leads you to the decision that you want them to move on, but then I ask, who do you want them to move on to? I just don't know that Michigan is in a position right now to be, like, it just seems like, I mean, yeah, Ohio State's dynasty has a potential hole in it, now that Urban Meyer's left, but it just feels like, I mean, how long has it been since they've beaten Ohio State?
It's been a while. But here's the thing. My only issue with this is the fact that there, while I can't name any specific names, there are a lot of good candidates out there for head coach. I think that's one of the biggest excuses, at least for me as a fan, hearing everyone's like, well, we can't get rid of Harbaugh. Who's going to replace him? I'm telling you, Michigan is still a high-quality program with good talent who can easily find a good replacement for Jim Harbaugh. Just because of the name, just because of his name value,
and
doesn't
I think
mean
the name has to be smaller on the person that replaces Harbaugh, because that will temper the expectations. Harbaugh and everything that he brought in, it was built all on expectations. This was the thing that was going to get Michigan back into the fold, and I feel like, if Michigan getting back into playoff contention was a surprise for the fans, if they treated their team more as like, we're a middle of the road team, and if they do better than we expected, we'll be happy, and if they do worse, we'll be a little mad, but we expect them to do slightly above average, right? Like, no one's watching the Detroit Tigers and going like, they won the division 4 years in a row at the beginning of this decade, and why aren't they doing that now? I mean, it's a little different because it's professional and college, and there's a never-ending cycle of talent that's coming through there. But programs have ups and downs, and I just feel like that Harbaugh was the wrong. He enabled this expectation mentality that I'm talking about, that I'm kind of sick of.
No, I understand where you're coming from. It's one of those things where, it's just tough. It's a tough position to be in because Michigan, they do have the expectation around it. It's tough to, you can say Michigan could bring in a smaller name, and I think that's smart, in aspects. The line, are not in the Lions, that Michigan needs to bring in someone who has a little bit of a smaller name, but I don't really think it should necessarily taper the expectations. I think it just needs to, because I believe that Michigan does have the talent to elevate themselves to a playoff team. It's just the coaching and the play calling that's an issue for me. So I think if,
fair,
so they have the right things in mind to the where you need to bring on you need to do what LSU brought in a brand new coach. At least I think they did. Or I think it's an offensive core. I think they brought in a new offensive coordinator. I think that's what it was. And that's the comparison, because they brought in a new offensive coordinator. Wasn't a really big name, but you see the results. I mean, LSU has top tier talent and they're producing with it, and Michigan is not. So it's not necessarily the name value behind it. It's just the quality of coaching. They just need to bring someone who knows how to run the football team better, because you're right. I am tired of saying, well, Harbaugh should have been this and Harbaugh should have been that. It's annoying because, that's all the things, he was brought in with specific expectations and has not met those expectations. So it's disappointing in that sense. So I understand where people are coming from, and that's where, and that's the moment where you have to say, well, yeah, it's time to move on. You know what I mean? They need to look at other options, and I don't think this program will have any issues finding other options.
Yeah, and I don't want it to come off like I'm saying Michigan fans should expect their team to lose, and that Michigan should not be trying to get better as a program and be okay being like, they shouldn't be okay with being middle of the road. That's not what I mean at all. I just mean that, this is something that I do a wrestling podcast, and I tell wrestling fans all the time is like, know what it is you're watching and have expectations for that. Don't have expectations for what it used to be. And, if you set your expectations to be mildly reasonable, and that's why I get on Harbaugh and the media circus, as I call it, that follows him, because like I said, it enables that sort of thinking that, oh, this is going to be big, when, I mean, if it's big, let it be a surprise at this point, because I feel like you're disappointing too many people, and that's the thing you hate to see the most, because bad teams don't always drive off sports fans, but disappointing teams do. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, I completely agree. I understand what you're saying.
All right, so that's enough about Michigan. We've blathered on about them long enough. Let's talk about Michigan State for a little bit.
Yeah, so Michigan State, they had a tough opponent this week, having to play Ohio State. And I think it's, I really just think the game went as we expected it to. Ohio State, as good as Michigan, as good as Michigan State's defense has been, Ohio State is just at a caliber of program where they just look so good. I mean, Justin Fields is proving to be as good as everyone thought he was. J.K. Dobbins looks great. Michigan State's offense still looks so bad. And it's just one of those things where, I fully expected, Ohio State to come out with this win. I think Ohio State doesn't lose another game this season. I feel like Ohio State usually does have one of those like sneaky losses. They always end up losing to one of those bad teams on their schedule, and maybe they will have a surprise loss in there. But for me, I think Ohio State's in a position where I don't see them losing again this season. They just look like a good football program. They look like they have everything under control. They don't look like they're at all phased with the absence of Urban Meyer whatsoever. They still look like a good football program. So I don't think I'm necessarily concerned about them. Michigan State, I'm a little bit iffy on where they are the rest of the season. They'll definitely be more up and down. I think their next biggest matchup will be against Michigan, and I think that'll be a big deciding game. If they can beat Michigan, I think that necessarily puts them where it sort of sets their destiny in terms of where they're supposed to be. And because I think a win over Michigan means more for Michigan State than a loss for Michigan means in that sense. It's kind of hard to explain.
When do they play?
I believe they play towards the end of the season. I believe they don't play for another couple weeks.
So each team has a little time to figure it out, and I do think that's a big matchup. Because as you were describing, Ohio State is is the giant of the Big Ten, right? Like they're what Alabama is to the SEC type deal. You know what I'm saying? They're what Clemson is to the ACC. They just there's a powerhouse. There is a clear powerhouse. There's a team to beat, and Ohio State is that team. They look unstoppable in almost all phases of the field. I don't think Lewerke's a bad quarterback. He has his bad moments, but they were limited to how many did they score? Like 10 points?
Yeah, it was 10 points. It was
again,
34 to 10.
A limited offense against a really good team. Obviously, the Michigan State defense didn't do as well as they've done earlier in the season because they gave up 35 points, I think. So, it's kind of the same deal as Michigan, except I feel like the expectations weren't there, and that's why State fans are managing it a little better than Michigan fans are. And Michigan State will be a very interesting game to watch because that's another game that I kind of throw all the rules out the window. Anything can happen at any time. But I think that one will be like the unofficial second place match of the conference.
No, I
Does that
agree.
make sense?
No, I agree. I understand where you're coming from. Yeah, I think a win for Michigan State, I think, just means more than if Michigan loses that game. I think if Michigan loses that game, I think it's definitely a big sign. I think one of Harbaugh's biggest, flaws has been the fact that he hasn't been able to beat Michigan State and Ohio State. And if he loses to Michigan State, then I think he gets the boot. I really do.
Yeah, that could be it, honestly. Because I don't think anyone's expecting them to beat the Wolverines to beat the Buckeyes at any point.
Yeah, I don't think he'll beat the Buckeyes either. And that's the thing. I think even if they do beat Michigan State and they lose to Ohio State, there's still a chance that I think Harbaugh loses his job. I don't necessarily know if Michigan will go about removing him from that position. I think Harbaugh is in a position where he needs to step down himself for the better of the program because I don't think the Michigan's athletic director has, I don't really think he has the guts to fire Jim Harbaugh. I really don't think he does. Just because of just his name. I mean, if you think about it,
they've dumped a lot of money into him too.
Yeah, they've dumped a lot of money. Yeah,
isn't he making like $5 million a year or something? Or?
He's making I don't know the specifics.
Maybe not
he's
$5. $5 might be an overestimate. I don't want to say anything I don't know, but he's definitely making $1 million a year, more than that. I would assume. It's so it's just. I get that he might not have the guts, but it'll be interesting to see. The one positive thing I can say about both Michigan State and Michigan is that basketball is gonna start soon, isn't it?
Yeah, big basketball. I know. I'm pretty sure Michigan State has some higher expectations in terms of Michigan. I know Michigan lost a lot of big players last year. They lost Brazdeikis, they lost Poole, and they lost Charles Matthews as well. They lost 3 of their pretty much starters on offense. So it'll definitely be a big question mark. I know Michigan recruiting has been a little bit disappointing. They've sort of lost out on a lot of big recruits.
Well, it's because Beeline left, and
Beeline
big
left.
Of a name as Howard is, he's gonna have some trouble at first. But it's all about what they do on the court this year. I think if they make a decent run into the tournament, that people will go, okay, everything's fine there. We can get right back on the wagon. But you're right, Michigan State fans, I think naturally have a higher expectation when it comes to basketball. Is a phenomenal coach. That program is run, I think rivaled only programs like John Beeline's. So Michigan State is just it's a really good time to be a Michigan State basketball fan, but football not so much.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing. Michigan State is disappointing. I think for both Michigan and Michigan State, as disappointing as their football seasons have been, I think they have a lot to look forward in basketball. Like I said, Tom Izzo, still a top coach in the nation. You've got Cassius Winston returning for Michigan State. And then on Michigan, you've got Franz Wagner. The brother of Mo Wagner will play for Michigan this year. I think in a high volume role this year. Like I said, Juwan Howard will be, it'll be his debut year as head coach. And as always, you got Xavier Simpson, probably will be your MVP again this year. And you have guys like Teskey returning as well. So, and Isaiah Livers, not to mention.
Don't forget Colin Castleton. I love
him.
him.
And Colin Castleton's taking big steps. He's put on a lot of weight. He's been working out, which is good. So
I met him once, right?
What's that?
I met him once.
Did you really?
Yeah, I met him. I was on a plane back to Florida from Michigan and saw this big, tall, lanky kid right after I think, Michigan played Ohio State basketball, and I was like, "That's got to be him, right?" Because he committed at the time.
Yeah.
I just went up to him after we got off the plane, and I was like, "You're Colin, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so we talked. I had an interview. It's somewhere deep. It might be on our old site actually, but yeah, I did have a conversation with him, and he impressed me. Not just, as a basketball player, obviously he's got the size, it's real size too. He's lanky, but, his demeanor certainly impressed me. He's, a tough kid, a tough above the shoulders, as my old baseball coach liked to say. And I just think he's got the right head on him. And if he's putting on weight, I think he's going to do big things when he finally does get to play good minutes. So basketball will be fun. Let's move on from college football. Chase, the Red Wings season has started, and I don't want to sound the alarm bells yet, but it's going pretty good.
Yeah. So, like I said, we do want to temper our expectations a little bit since we're just 2 games in. But it's hard not to be excited for Red Wings hockey just 2 games in if you watched. I think expectations are through the roof right now for the Red Wings, especially for left winger Anthony Mantha. He's looked absolutely phenomenal.
I've never seen our Red Wings chat so active.
I know our Red Wings chat on our website has been buzzing just because of the fact that Anthony Mantha has played absolutely phenomenal. He's had 7 points through his first 2 games. He had a 4-goal game against the Dallas Stars in their previous matchup on Sunday. He looks like he's literally going to score. He's on pace to score like 160 some goals this season. It's ridiculous.
You think that happens?
Absolutely not, but I think realistically, he could score 40. He could score 40 plus goals. It's 100% a possibility. I had a prediction of him scoring 30 goals this season, maybe even 35. But I seriously think the kid can hit 40 plus. I mean, he's looked fantastic. I think he's finally gotten to a point in maturity and we're in his game to the point where he knows how much he can put his body on the line, how he has to position himself, and to what degree he has to play in order to score. If you look, I mean, he's just been. I mean, the guy is not small by any means. I mean, that he's a massive frame for for a hockey player. And the dude is, he's flying around. His whole nickname coined by Dylan Larkin right now is the Flying Frenchman, just because of his speed. Is insane for his size. He's not only a big guy, but he's got the speed. He scored a beautiful. One of his goals, which is absolutely beautiful, sped around the defense of Dallas and snuck one by Qdobin last night against the Stars. And he just looks so good. I mean, the first line of the Red Wings offense looks fantastic. Through 2 games, they have 16 points, 8 goals, and 8 assists combined between Dylan Larkin, Tyler Bertuzzi, and Anthony Mantha, which is just incredible in terms of production. You love to see that. But it's one of those things where you have to look at it and say, outside of this line, the Red Wings do not look good. They look poor defensively outside of Filip Hronek, and their depth is absolutely brutal. Andreas Anthonisiou's missed a couple games. He's yet to play a game this season. The Red Wings were actually one of the last teams to start their season. I think they were the last team to play a regular season game this year, and Anthonisiou still didn't play. I'm assuming he'll be back soon. He's only day-to-day. But the rest of their offense looks really bad besides their top line. They've got maybe Taro Hirose, and then on defense...
But does it matter if your top line is scoring 4 goals?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, when your top line...
It's not going to happen every game.
Yeah. When your top line is debatably one of the best in hockey right now, and and you can quote me on it all you want, I seriously do think that, the Red Wings top line is one of the best in hockey. I think they're one of the most underrated lines in all of the NHL. But depth is big. I mean, I'm not saying that Dallas and Nashville they are good hockey teams. I'm not saying that, but they haven't played any in-division games, and they haven't played a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs, which they played this week.
Yeah, I was going to say, who did they beat? Because, sometimes if you have a weaker schedule to start the season and you get a couple of wins, I mean, the Tigers did the exact same thing. I think they were at one point 20-22, and it was hey, this is not as bad as we thought. And then, we'll get to the Tigers at a certain point. So.
Yeah, but I'm not saying, I mean, the Predators are very good. They got guys like Roman Josi and Philip Forsberg, who are really good, and the Stars are as well. They picked up Joe Pavelski from the San Jose Sharks in the offseason. They also have guys like Jamie Benn and Alex Radulov, who are always really good. I mean, those are two pretty good hockey teams, but you have yet to play super strong, deep teams in terms of depth. You haven't played. They'll have upcoming matchups, a lot of matchups since they're in division. They'll have matchups against the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Boston Bruins, even the Florida Panthers, who just picked up Sergei Bobrovsky and who continue to be really good.
Panthers game.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think
they play 30 minutes from my house.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be good this year. I guarantee it. The Atlantic Division. My issue with the Red Wings is the fact that the Red Wings really didn't add that much. They ended up losing Witkowski. They lost a couple. Yeah, they obviously lost Cronwall to retirement. Yeah. And then they lost a couple other players. I believe they lost one player on defense. I can't remember who it is.
Well, they're set to lose a couple of players after this year, right?
Yes. Yeah, they're going to lose a lot of players on defense. But to be honest with you, the Red Wings stayed.
Do they have to lose them, or I mean, they can resign? Well,
so they could resign, but they won't. Trust me, because they're losing guys like Jonathan Ericsson, who's been awful. They're losing guys like Trevor Daley, who has just been old and banged up, and he just really hasn't played at the top of his game. They're losing a lot of guys. They're cutting a lot of fat, essentially, after the end of the season. Yeah,
because if the defense is the problem, I guess you don't mind waiting out the contract, especially if you're still in rebuilding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they'll lose pretty much everyone on defense besides Hronek, Cholowski, and DeKaiser.
And who are the saviors? I mean, is there anyone in the system that should give you hope to replace those defensive guys that are
obviously you have you have the most recent draft pick in 2019, Moritz Seider.
Yeah, he's good.
He's a defenseman out of Aller Mannheim in Germany. He's already played amongst adults. The kid already plays in Grand Rapids. He'll probably be up on the main roster next season. You'll definitely see it. They have a kid by the name of Jared McIsaac who plays for the Halifax Mooseheads. He's not with the Griffins yet, but he is really good. I think he'll be on the main roster in a couple years. I'm trying to think of who else is on defense there. The Griffins don't really have a super strong defensive core. It's nothing necessarily to write home about, but they definitely do have a lot of good players in their system. I think, just in the lower leagues, I think they do have a lot to look forward to. I'm trying to look at the Griffins roster right now and figure out where they have.
Well, let me ask you this: if they're losing pieces on the defense that aren't necessarily worth keeping, right? They have a collection of young players, because I know the team's relatively young, that are moving their way up. With the 2-0 start, and I'm not trying to prop up, predictions and things like that, but if they do better than expected, right? If they don't have one of those high picks and they have, a little lower, does that hurt them? Do they still need to draft high, or are they in a position where they have young talent that they can start putting out there and making some, free agent acquisition, signing better people to complement who they assume will be new stars?
So I'm going to set the record straight. Here's the thing. My prediction is the fact that the Red Wings will still finish in the bottom 5 of the league. Regardless of the fact that they started off hot. Like I said, this is where we have to temper expectations. We're not talking about picking outside the top 5 here. I mean, they might. I mean, they technically picked outside the top 5. They picked 6th over the last 2 years, but I don't think they will fall out of the top 10 in terms of draft pick. I just don't see it happening. Their division is too good. They didn't improve enough, and their depth is just not there.
And in hockey, those 10 picks. I mean, obviously, our listeners can understand that I'm not the biggest hockey fan, so I don't exactly know how this goes. But I know in baseball that when you pick someone, maybe the first 5 picks really, really matter. But then the rest of your first round picks, it's just kind of a crapshoot. There's only a handful of good players. Whereas I think in the NFL draft and the NBA draft, different sports mean different things. But it seems like the first round there is really, really important. Lottery picks are important and things like that. It is important that they stay in the top 10, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, so the way it works is the NHL is very similar to the MLB. They have the multi-tiered system in the way their development works. Um, so what the way Steve Eisman sort of described the Cider pick last year is that outside the top five, a lot of these guys are what are called blanket picks. So, you're kind of, or just I guess like in the hat picks. You're kind of just pulling names out of a hat, and you're sort of just taking a gamble on a lot of these guys. And they all sort of pull into this one sort of big like blanketed area where they all don't have a specific tier, but they just like you mentioned, it's sort of you know grasping at straws in terms of,
Very similar to
talent.
baseball,
Yeah, very similar to the MLB in terms of picking. So I think if they do fall outside the top five, or if they, for whatever reason, if they fall outside the top 10, I don't think that necessarily means they'll get a bad prospect, because I think anyone in this round is still a very good, still has a good shot at being a solid prospect. But I do think that, this is a very strong draft this year. And I think landing a top 5 pick, regardless of the fact that you're drafting defenseman or you're drafting forward or center, I think the Red Wings still will get a solid pick. And that's where I think I'm coming from, and just the fact that the Red Wings will not fall out of bottom 5 in terms of standings. I don't think they finish. I think they finish around 6th or 7th in their division, and they finish bottom 6 in just overall, like in the league. I just don't really see them finishing any better than they did last year. I'm saying they had 79 points last season. I'd say between 72 and 79 points again this season. I don't think they crack 80.
Well, that's a little higher than your prediction was last time. I think last time we talked, I asked you for a point prediction before the season, and you estimated like 65 to 75. I mean, that's still pretty close. But do you think you think they can hit 80 at this point? I mean, you've tempered expectations.
It's a very slim chance, but I think if they do crack 80, I think it does begin to hurt their chances. So I don't really think they will do that, just because I think right now they're off to a hot start, but I really think they will sort of taper out, and they'll begin to cool down. The Red Wings aren't in any position to bring up any prospects right now. So for any Red Wings fans listening, you're not going to see guys like Philip Zadina or Moritz Seider up on the main roster very often, this less barring any kind of circumstances, there's injury or whatever, knock on wood, hopefully that doesn't happen. But you just won't see guys like that getting called up. It just doesn't make sense for those guys to be called up. I would say probably next year you'll probably start to see guys, and you guys got on defense like Moritz Seider, who else am I trying to think of? You got Oliver Koski, Gustav Lindstrom. You might even see Philip Larson in the next couple of years, who's their goalie prospect. He's slated to be the backup this year in Grand Rapids, but everyone thinks that he could be potentially the number one goalie of the future. But I do think in the next couple of years you'll start to see guys, especially when you'll see guys fall out at the end on defense. You'll see guys like Daly, Erickson, Bowie, and stuff like that. They'll sort of fall off the bottom of the defense. They'll have to fill in some specific holes. You'll still have Hronik and Cholowski, but you'll see guys like Seider and Koski up on the main roster next year, possibly even a guy like Joe Hicketts. I think the Red Wings really do need to solidify another defenseman. They do have some good defense in their pipeline, but I think they need another.
Is there anyone you have in mind to fill that hole? Because you're talking about, we might see some of these guys next year, and the year after it would be more likely. But as you have the young guys coming up, you want not always veterans, but people who are tenured in the league, who know how to, be complement players, who know how to, who are unselfish, who will help the young guys kind of get to the point where they need to be. Is there anyone, that you want the Red Wings to sign next offseason?
In terms of signing, like it's tough. I don't really know. Like, there's not really any free agents. Free agency is tough. I don't really think there's any like big defensive players that the Red Wings necessarily need to go after. Because free agency is tough. I don't really know.
They just need to stay the course and keep rebuilding.
Yeah, they really just need to focus on the draft. You guys they're not really, unless for whatever reason they completely tank out and lose start losing a ton. I don't think they'll have a chance at Lafreniere, who is clearly the best overall player in the draft this year. But they've got a great chance to draft guys like Lucas Raymond, Quentin Byfield from the Sudbury Wolves, Cole Perfetti is another really good center from the Saginaw Spirit. In terms of defensemen, Justin Barron from Halifax, Jamie Drysdale from the Erie Otters in the OHL. You've got some good options in terms of defensemen, and it's a really strong offensive draft this year. Like I said, Lafreniere, probably the best player in the draft. Quentin Byfield is spectacular, plays center. The Red Wings could always use another center in their system. I think they will sort of go more of a wing or possibly a defenseman route. So I think if they can get a guy, like an Anton Lindell, someone like that, possibly later in the draft, sort of like I would think more of like a winger, in my opinion at least. I think fits what the Red Wings want to do more rather than the center. I think their center depth is good, especially with guys like Joe Veleno and Michael Rasmussen in their system. I think they'll sort of look to either build on their defense or build on winger. Because they need a guy who can step in the next couple of years. I think you'll start to see a lot of these guys, some of these older guys, out of the equation. You'll see they'll start to lose guys like Abdelkader and Nielsen and just some of their older veterans. And I'm sure they still will bring on some veteran presence. They'll sign some minor free agents that will have a veteran presence. But you will see a significantly younger team in the next 2 years, I think.
Yeah, so the overall assessment is that it's a hot start, but we should enjoy it while it lasts because the Red Wings are still in full rebuild mode and they still have, a couple years. They need to make some good draft picks to make this thing go along, but it's definitely not time to start celebrating as a Red Wings fan. But you should enjoy these wins when they do come because we predict that they will be seldom.
For sure, yeah. And I think, like I said, soak in these wins. I'm sure you'll see a lot of scoring. Dylan Larkin and Anthony Mantha and that top line, including Tyler Bertuzzi as well, will be exciting. You'll see a lot of scoring, but you'll probably see a lot of tellers in the loss column this season. So that's sort of an expectation to look forward to, I guess, if you're hoping for wins.
All right, let's move on to our fourth story, and that's the Detroit Tigers. The Detroit Tigers ended their season with, what did I say earlier, 47 and 114?
I think that's what you said.
Yeah, they did. They played 161 instead of the traditional, well, not traditional, but the regular 162 because the game with the Chicago White Sox got rained out like twice or something, and they had a couple doubleheaders at the end of the season, so it didn't make any sense tacking on another when both teams were out of playoff contention. Obviously, they'd been eliminated long ago, and it didn't really matter if they played that last game. It could just potentially hurt someone or make a pitcher throw out their arm, so I'm okay with them not playing that game 162, but the Tigers definitely had an underwhelming season. We knew they were going to be bad. I didn't know if they were going to be this bad, but they've secured the first overall pick, which, last year I think they had the fifth pick, which ended up being Riley Green. The year before that, they had the first pick, which ended up being Casey Mize. And both those players look to be good, but much like we were talking about in hockey, it's a few years off until we're going to get to see them be who it is we want them to be. So with that said, there's a lot of work to do in Detroit. The number one pick, I think we talked about this in the last episode. I couldn't come up with the Arizona kid, but his name is Spencer Torkelson. He's a first baseman, and if you know anything about MLB scouting, they do things on a 20 to 80 scale, and 70 on that scale is really impressive. And he's got a 70 hit tool, so he is a big, strong hitting, large first baseman, which is just, I think if you look at the Tigers, they definitely need a first baseman because you have guys like Hicks filling in for that. I mean, you had Miguel Cabrera playing first base at the beginning of the season, but his body has proven time and time again that he just should not be on the field. It takes away from what he can do with the bat. He's still a serviceable hitter. He's an above average hitter. He can still put up 280 to 300 or slightly above that if the team gets rocking and everyone's in good spirits. But I think that Spencer Torkelson is the right guy for them to draft, but there is plenty of options, and of course there's an entire season, like a college baseball season, so I don't know that they're going to go in that direction. I know that, let me just find here, that someone had them projected to take the this kid from Vanderbilt that I can't remember his name, Austin Martin. Yeah, he plays infield, but he's pretty much like a five-tool prospect. If you don't know what a five-tool prospect, it's essentially what Mike Trout has proven to be since the minute he stepped into the league. And it means that, he can just do everything. He can run, he can hit for power, he can play the field, and he's got a strong arm. So this Austin Martin is the projected pick, but obviously Projected picks don't mean much. He could get hurt, God forbid. He could have a bad season, and Torkelson could have a really good season. But those are kind of the two that I'm looking at as a Tigers fan. And you want to get familiar with the names Spencer Torkelson or Austin Martin, because I feel like those are two of the guys that you're going to hear a lot of talk about going into, I believe the draft is in next June. So we have many, many months. What is that? 8 months? Still like 3/4 of a year to figure that out. But I think that one of the best things about Martin and what makes him so appealing is that he can play center field too. He plays second base, but people have described him as the best pure hit tool in college baseball. So when you have a hitter like that, and not necessarily for power, but he can hit for power, but someone who's going to almost certainly hit for a high average and get on base a lot with some good speed. And if you have the potential to throw him into center field, which I feel like the Tigers have a hole there now that's ever rotating. Victor Reyes has looked good at the end of the season, but you could always shift him to another outfield position. I've been a big advocate for them to move Christian Stewart to the DH position, but that is impossible because of Miguel Cabrera. So there's lots of holes to fill, and there's a potential that you could trade someone like Stewart for a few good prospects to kind of bolster that, and then stick Martin in center and move Reyes over to left. So there's a lot of options, and of course the draft is far away, but that's certainly something we have to touch on. And that's really it for the Tigers. Chase, you got anything else?
Not really that I can mention. I mean, I'm not really sure where the Tigers are in development. Obviously you have to look at, guys potentially you'll see in the main roster next year. I mean, what are your thoughts on some of, prospects we'll sort of see next season? Will we see guys like Casey Mize or anything like that in the next couple of seasons? Like, what prospects do you think you'll see at least in the next couple of seasons for the Tigers?
I think that they're going to push Jake Rogers, the catcher, who he did play towards the end of the season. His average was underwhelming for sure. He just can't figure out, how to get a major league hit necessarily. He's last time I checked, he was in the middle 100s, which is certainly not what you want someone to be. But he does have a good arm, and he's got good instincts as a catcher, which are always two things that you want on your team, because it gives a sense of security. It limits base running when you have someone that's feared behind the plate. So I'd like to see him really work on hitting this offseason, and potentially be the Tigers. I could see an argument for him being the starting catcher, although I don't think that he will be. But he's definitely a name that I think could come up. Obviously, I talked about Victor Reyes, Harold Castro. They both, I think, were hitting near 300, possibly over 300 at the end of the season, but they were very good, in my opinion, in the last couple of, September's a weird month because certain teams are playing and certain teams are not, because they just don't care about their seasons anymore. But those rookies had stuff to fight for this year, and they definitely impressed me. So those three names, I feel like, are going to be the main names. Obviously, you have guys like Travis Demeritte, who they traded for, I think, Shane Green to the Braves to get him. I think you'll see his name a lot. But as far as the big names go, Casey Mize, right? I don't know that you're going to see him just yet. I think the pitcher that you should look for to come up next, who has the best chance of entering a starting rotation, or you could even see him out of the bullpen, because I know they like to test people out in the bullpen, but that's Bo Burrows. I think he's probably about 23 now, so he's getting to be the age where he has experience and he's proven himself enough, and I think numbers-wise he's done the best. But you can pretty much just look at that entire Double-A Erie Seawolves team, and almost like all of their players are going to be the future of the Tigers. I mentioned Riley Green. I think he got moved up there towards the end of the minor league season, and he just looks to be everything that the Tigers wanted him to be when they drafted him. And I know Miguel Cabrera was a big fan of him when he hit BP at Comerica Park. Miguel wanted him to stay with the Tigers, which, it's, even though it was semi-jokingly, it was big praise from one of the best hitters of all time. So developmentally, I'd put them right about where you're putting the Red Wings. That they're a few years off. I mean, my projected year that I tell Tigers fans is, if you're a casual fan and you only like to watch when they're doing well, and when they suck, you don't want to watch, I would say that 2022 is your best bet, which sounds crazy because it's 2019, but it will be 2020 long enough. Next year, they re-sign Alavila. Gardenhire is going to be the coach again, so I don't think the plan is changing for next year. I think you can expect much of the same. Like we talked about kind of all show, is that the one thing that you want to see is some development, something to show the fans that, hey, we care, we're trying. The players obviously always do that, but it's from the management. And I know a lot of people were upset. We talked about this a couple of episodes ago, but Al Avila signing that 3-year extension rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. When you ask, Chris Ilitch about things, he gives these crappy non-answers that really just say, like, if you read in between the lines, each one of his comments just say, we suck and we're going to suck for a while and we're trying to make this team profitable. It's about money for him. I think everyone else is getting paid low amounts of money. I mean, Michael Fulmer might be up for a little higher bit of a contract because of how he's performed, but he's obviously been hurt. But the two main people that are getting paid are Jordan Zimmerman, who's at like $25 million a year, and Miguel Cabrera has $30 million guaranteed. Now, we've talked about this kind of in excess. Zimmerman has been the worst experiment the Tigers have had in the past decade or so. But also add on to that, some money is still going to Prince Fielder. So I think between the two, there's something like $35 million owed to them. So
Jeez,
yeah.
ridiculous.
So okay. So you add all those numbers up, right? And that's $65 million of allotted cap space, right? And you look at the rest of the team, and they're getting paid $1 million here, a couple $100,000 there, a couple million here. You're really the budget. I don't know the exact number, but it's not that $215 million budget that they had 5 years ago, 4 years ago. They've done a good job thinning out, getting kind of low, not low rent, but cheap older veterans to, like, I want to say boost their roster, but it really is just kept them able to get the first pick overall.
Yeah, just kept them in a stable position.
Yeah, so I'd like to see them spend a little more. Obviously, I hate to say it, but the best case scenario would be for Jordan Zimmerman and Miguel Cabrera to both retire. I think it would help the rebuild process along. But I'm okay with Cabrera staying the length of his contract, honestly, because one $30 million player, and I know that $30 million doesn't warrant a 280 batting average. It warrants like a 310 average with 30 home runs a year, and that's just not who Miguel Cabrera is anymore. But I'm fine with him staying because I've been a big proponent this whole time of, paying him for just being everyone's Tiger for the last 10 years. I mean, he's just
paying him for loyalty. Yeah, I understand
it's
what you mean.
it's just like it was like when Dwayne Wade left the Miami Heat. It felt wrong. It just didn't.
Yeah,
it wasn't. It was. I mean, I'm not saying that Cabrera had a good time in Miami too, but he's a Tiger. He signed that deal to retire as a Tiger. I was in love with him when he signed that deal because Detroit is a city that doesn't get a lot of love, and when you have a player who's one of the greatest of all time, I don't care how you feel about it, that's what he is. And you have him say, this place has become my home. This is where I want to finish things. That is nice. That is just, it makes you feel good as a fan, and I value him, at $30 million, whatever, that's fine. But Zimmerman, after, this year, he'll be off the books. I think that Fielder contract comes off the books. They've got some flexibility. And this is why I was asking you all those questions about the Red Wings, because I want the Tigers to, I can't tell you who will be a free agent and stuff, and I don't know. It's all about the budget, what Chris Ilitch sets as, here's what we want to spend to get money and stuff. And, I think with ticket sales being as low as they were, that budget isn't going to go up because they're expecting the same thing. So I just, they've put themselves into a place where they can't spend free agent money because they have two big free agents on the book, and there's fear of that happening, and that they've stuck themselves in the middle of a never-ending rebuild. So it's just a bad time, and I that's why I say the retirements could really help move things along, and that developmental talent that we were talking about earlier is just a few years off. So I'd like to see. That's what Josh Harrison was supposed to be at second base this year. He was supposed to kind of fill in and be a veteran, prove himself, get another contract somewhere else. But the Tigers have been, in my opinion, doing a bad job of signing those guys, and watching them produce. So we'll see how it goes, but I do not have high hopes for the Tigers next year. I don't think it'll be 114 losses bad, but then again, I didn't think that would happen this year.
Yeah, and I have one more question before we end it. I know you said the draft was around like 10 months away in June, but I want to hear your prediction. Who do you think the Tigers are going to take with the first overall pick? What's your prediction for that?
Well, I mentioned Torkelson and Austin earlier, and I think that those two are really high. Like the best ones that you can talk about right now. There's a pitcher at LSU that his name escapes me, but he looks to be a very pure ace pitcher. He's got 4 pitches, I think, that are all, they all have good stuff. They all have good movement. He's got good control. He can turn all 4 of those pitches into professional level pitches. So it would be interesting to see them take him, because I think pitching, I think if you have a dominant pitching staff, it really helps your team, especially with all the youth that they're building up. But they need something on the offensive side. And I know I mentioned a lot of, holes for Austin and Torkelson, because, whoever they pick, they're going to have a tough time fitting them into the plans, because they have some of these, I mentioned Kristen Stewart. I think they need to trade him because he's about 26, I think, and he's just, a good hitting outfielder, which means he's technically a DH. So I'd like to see Torkelson get picked, because first base it's hard to find a big hitting first baseman. And once you have that, like a Miguel Cabrera, like a Prince Fielder, like Paul Goldschmidt, like any of these guys, any of the great first basemen, when you have a good one, you have a good one. But when you have a bad one, you have a bad one. So Torkelson's my pick. But like I said earlier, the draft is far off. There's another season to be played. Things can change. It could be someone we haven't talked about yet. It's there's just nothing that's sure at this point. But if the draft were today, I'm taking Torkelson.
All right.
Alrighty, and our final story of the day, even though we've gone a bit long today, we're going to talk about some wrestling. Chase, it was probably the biggest week in professional wrestling in the last 20 years this week. So my question to you is, did you hear about any of it?
I heard very little about it, actually. I was on Twitter last night because I was following the Red Wings game, and I was like, people were tweeting about Hell in a Cell. I was like, that's going on. I was like, I didn't realize that was happening. So I am completely out of it in terms of the Red Wing, or not, why do I keep saying Red Wings? In terms of the Red, oh my God, I said it again. In terms of the wrestling news, I am completely out of the loop in terms of wrestling. So you're definitely going to have to fill me in on some of that. What are some of the biggest moments that happened besides Hell in a Cell? Because I heard about that, and I heard about a little bit of sort of get into that later. But what were some other big wrestling events that sort of happened this past week?
Yeah, so I'll just run you through what my schedule has been, because if you guys don't know, I'm the lead editor and writer of the professional wrestling section at MichiganSportsAndEntertainment.com. So if you haven't checked out our stuff, definitely go check that out. But that means I'm in charge of making sure that most of the main shows that people are watching, one, get watched by us, get live tweeted on our Twitter at MSE Pro Wrestling, and that we write articles about it and review it in a way that helps not only the person who watched it with us connect to the story and have an outlet to talk about it, but for people like you, who maybe haven't watched it and they want to know, well, what's this all about? So let's run through my week. On Monday, we have, of course, Monday Night Raw, which is on the USA Network at 8 until 11. And they said that this week was premiere week because they had SmackDown move from Tuesday nights on USA Network to Fox on Friday, which is the big show, which we'll get to in a minute. But Raw on USA was an interesting show. They had Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan, which I'm sure those names you've heard before. So there was a good amount of buzz surrounding it, but it really felt like the thing before they made the transition to SmackDown. But before we could get to SmackDown, we go to Wednesday night. And it's the beginning of the Wednesday Night Wars. So if you watched wrestling or heard anything about wrestling in the 1990s, you know of the Monday Night Wars between WWE and WCW. There's a new company called AEW, All Elite Wrestling. We've talked about them on this program before. But they are now on TNT at 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights. Now, WWE, in what I call a reactionary move, started shopping their developmental show, NXT. NXT used to be a 1-hour show weekly that was taped maybe 6 episodes at a time at a school actually right next to where I used to live in Orlando, Full Sail University. Now, NXT for a long time has kind of been the standard of like great American wrestling, because the main roster stuff for on SmackDown really just isn't. It's more storyline, and the storylines don't often make sense, but the benefit of having a tape show and a 400-person audience in a smaller arena is that the fans really love everything that's happening, and the stories make sense because you really can't change them week to week. So now you have this NXT, which is the developmental show, but it's really turning into the third main roster brand, because it really is probably the best show WWE puts on each week. They're going head-to-head with AEW, and that's why I call it reactionary, because I feel that if AEW didn't get off the ground and start, Vince McMahon, the owner of WWE, wouldn't have started shopping this show, because it had it was kind of the crown jewel of the WWE Network, which is $10 a month, and you get all the archive footage from pretty much all of American wrestling that's ever happened. So, it's a really great tool, but NXT being away from that, I think, wouldn't have happened unless AEW started. So, with that in mind, obviously, when it comes to wars, the one thing that matters are the ratings. If you ask the fans, and I've talked about this a million times on Twitter with the fans, that ratings mean one thing. It does not mean the show was better. It can mean the show was better, but really what it means is that the show was more watched. It means that it was more hyped and that it got the mainstream to buy into it. So if we're talking about Raw, I can't exactly remember the number that Raw did, but it was in the, I think, 2.5 million, and it was their best number since August 12th. So, 4 months later, they do their best number. Of course, they're going up against Monday Night Football, so ratings are a big thing there. But the Wednesday Night Wars, AEW got a 1.409 million, I think, and NXT got 891,000. So that's a big discrepancy, and a lot of people are, making that a big deal because AEW is this new show, but here it is beating WWE. Of course, you have the people on the WWE side saying, well, it's our developmental show. They actually debuted NXT 2 weeks ago, but it was only 1 hour on USA, and the other hour was on the WWE Network, and this was their first 2-hour live show. But they essentially turned that into a mini pay-per-view. They had a championship match to start things off that was the best match of the entire week. But it just wasn't enough to draw viewers. So that 600,000 audience will be interesting to monitor. I'm not ready to say that AEW's here and beating WWE just yet because that's just not the case. It's it's a debut. Ratings could certainly fall, but ratings could also rise. This could be, Chase, maybe you'll start watching wrestling now. Who knows? I mean, it's literally on every night of the
maybe
week.
I'll have to tune in, huh?
Yeah, and then so SmackDown debuted on Fox on Friday, which is now the 4th show that I had to watch this week, and that's another 2-hour show from 8 to 10, and it felt very rushed because they were trying to fit everything in, and they had promised a lot, like a lot of legends that they promised didn't end up being on the show, and they had the advertised match, which I think was the big draw for a lot of people, was Kofi Kingston, who was the WWE champion, against Brock Lesnar, who I'm sure you're familiar with. And
yeah, definitely.
and Brock literally had a 9-second match, killed Kofi, and took his belt, and people were furious because Kofi Kingston is the first African-American champion in WWE. He's been booked very strong to be, a very tough competitor, and it kind of just tells fans that 6 months of your life was wasted watching this guy because at the end of the day, the big white guy's going to beat him up. If that wasn't enough, they debuted MMA fighter, I guess now wrestler, Cain Velasquez. There's a long history. Cain actually beat Brock in the UFC, so that's why it matters a lot. But the problem with the story there is that it makes wrestling fans, and especially new wrestling fans, and I'll get to how many new fans there were on this show, but people who are watching this product for the first time, that immediately tells them, listen, this guy's been champion for 6 months. Now, he's not as good as this big monster. But you know who's even better than this big monster? Someone who doesn't even do this full time. Someone who just actually fights. And it tells people that real fighters are more important than fake fighters. And when you're trying to get over your brand, which is all about fake fighting, that's not exactly what you want to go with. So I was very disappointed, and really the entire way that the show ended up. I would be okay with Brock Lesnar as champion if he had a 10-minute match with Kofi Kingston and did really well. But there's always the chance that I'm wrong because SmackDown, it is on a Fox has more viewers just nationwide than USA does, and they actually pushed about 4 million viewers on Fox. So I think that's the most watched WWE show in, it's got to be years. So it was definitely a success ratings wise, but as I caution with the Wednesday Night Wars, ratings don't mean everything. It doesn't mean the show was necessarily good. It doesn't mean 4 million people are going to watch. I don't know where you watch football. Some people watch Red Zone, some people watch CBS, NBC, Fox, but in a bunch of the Fox stuff, I think all week they've just been promoting this Friday Night SmackDown.
Oh yeah, it's been everywhere.
Yeah,
you can't watch. Yeah,
and that's that's kind of the big deal behind it. And that's why I asked you earlier if you actually saw any of it, tuned in to watch it, because I think that Fox is pushing really hard to say, hey, we want to make this work. But I don't know that it's actually going to work in the end. I think that you could see them. I think you will see SmackDown dip back into the like lower 3 millions, because that's just what Fox shows should do. And I think that there's a potential that if they don't change things with their booking, with their storytelling, that it could slip into the 2 millions again. So that's kind of my wrestling spiel. Oh, and then of course we had Hell in a Cell, like you mentioned, which had another awful ending. WWE all Monday Night Raw, Friday Night SmackDown, and Hell in a Cell had, I think, god-awful endings that left the fans angry, which is sometimes what you want to do. You know, it's called heat. You want to make them boo because the bad guy wins. But this is not the good kind of heat. This is the bad kind of booing. This is the booing that says, you didn't give us what you should have given us. You didn't even give us something that made sense. You just gave us something that you thought was going to be the opposite of what we wanted to make us angry. And, you know, that's just not... It's called go away heat. It means that you don't want to watch the product that's on your screen. And there's a difference between that than wanting to watch the product on your screen and disliking the character they're putting. You know, you've watched a good television show. They're heroes, villains. The best villains are the ones that you shudder and you have to kind of look away from the television because they're so creepy. But that's not what's being done here. That's what's being done is they built up Bray Wyatt, who is also known as the Fiend, as this big, scary psycho murder clown. And everyone wanted to just see him crush the Universal Champion Seth Rollins in like 2 minutes in Hell in a Cell. And what they did instead was they put on like a 10-15 minute match where Seth Rollins delivered a curb stomp, which is when you just take your foot and you smash the guy's head who's laying down into the curb. He did that about 20 times, and each time the Fiend got back up. And then eventually the match ended in a... I keep saying disqualification. People have corrected me and said it's a no contest. You know, what they did was they set up a chair in between a ladder, and then he got a sledgehammer, and he delivered that to blow him in the head. And the referee said, oh my God, this guy can't fight anymore, so the match is over. If you ask me, if you're in something called Hell in a Cell, and the other person, you know, incapacitates you, that's a win. And it's not a win, you know, you know, so they just kind of... We'll see what happens on Raw tonight. I'm about to watch that in an hour, so by the time this is up, you know, what I've been saying might actually make sense, but I highly doubt it. So yeah, it's just a big wrestling week, and my big takeaway from it is that it's same old WWE, but they're gonna get a lot more viewers because of this Fox deal, and that AEW so far has a good thing going on. I really enjoyed their show Wednesday night. I'd put it as the second best show of the week, behind actually the NXT show. I hope that NXT gets back up to 1 million viewers, because my biggest fear is that with the low ratings, Vince McMahon is going to get his hands on it. And I think that Triple H, you know who that is. Paul Levesque. He's in charge of NXT, and I hope that he just gets to ride that out and keep doing it, because he put together one of the best shows I've seen on television, wrestling shows I've seen on television in 2019. It was just really that good. He put together a match of the year candidate, in my opinion. So, you know, I'd love to see more of what NXT and AEW are both doing. Wednesday nights, if you're a new wrestling fan and you want to say, David, what is the show that I should watch? Just flip back and forth between USA and TNT on Wednesday night. Pick a show and then watch that one, and then record the other one and watch the one after that, because they're probably both going to be really good for at least another month or two. We'll see what happens if the ratings hold up like this, but I have faith that they're going to kind of balance out, and that it's going to just be a really great period of wrestling, despite all the bad things I just talked about WWE doing, because the main roster isn't everything, even though it's the most publicized, you know?
Yeah. I do have a question for you. So I know I did see a lot of backlash from the whole Kofi Kingston thing, and just the outpouring of support from, you know, other fellow wrestlers. I mean, I know so many people either tweeted at him or posted about it.
Yeah,
and obviously he was a very influential champion. Obviously, you said being the first African American champion. You know, so like, what do you think? You know, his impact. You know, what sort of that impact has going forward, you know, because you sort of, I'm curious about whether the fact this is going to create a ripple effect, because you saw this earlier, just the fact that, you know, Brock Lesnar, you know, you've seen similar stories like this with Brock Lesnar, where he's held the championship for too long, and you feel like guys who are, you know, more deserving and, you know, are sort of like mainstays in the company aren't getting their, you know, are end up getting dominated by someone who's sort of a temporary piece. in the WWE. So I'm just curious on what your thoughts are in terms of this being. Do you have this being a similar parallel? Do you think Kofi, contends for the championship again, or do you think, WWE sort of moves on to this whole Kane, Velasquez, Brock thing for the championship and sort of keep these guys on top for a while like they used to have Brock?
So you probably don't know it, but that was an absolutely loaded question, and I have tons to respond about it.
Yeah.
So first things first, the fact that, you saw the other wrestlers, saying, tweeting out things of support, Kofi was, a great champion and things like that. For me, that is them saying that they disagree with the booking. That Kofi did something. I mean, he's a smaller guy, and Vince traditionally doesn't like smaller guys. He's black, which Vince is not a racist. I won't subscribe to that way of thinking, but he does see the commercial appeal in making, what is like, it's in traditional television, minorities have been the bad guys, and there's something to, maybe a foreign person being a heel because you have a good American babyface. There is something to that. But Kofi was an underdog story from the minute it started. It really wasn't supposed to happen. So I do think that you're going to see more stories like that, because as much as I give crap to Vince, he's a smart man, and I think he understands what happens, and he knows that at certain points it's undeniable. You have to get with the times and give certain people a push. But at the same time, I think that they're still going to go in that Cain Velasquez type direction, because it's clear to me that they want to pass the SmackDown, which is on Fox, as a real sports show. I would assume Ronda Rousey will be back at some point to be on that show. You can expect massive ratings when that happens. But I think Kofi Kingston and the entire New Day, which is his faction with Xavier Woods and Big E, I think they're all going to do great things on Raw, because there's an upcoming draft where they're going to separate the brands, because one's on one network and one's on the other, so it'll be easier that way. And I think that Monday Night Raw is actually going to turn into the wrestling brand, the one where you can actually see the things that you wanted, and Fox is going to be this kind of, all right, this is the show that we're going to present to the mainstream to help get more people to buy into it, which I don't necessarily have a problem with it, but like you said, the wrestlers clearly weren't happy with what they did to Kofi, but they can't outright say it, because they own, they are independent contractors, and the owner has full power over them. So that's just kind of how it's going to be. The Cain Velasquez and Brock Lesnar fight is actually going to be at the Crown Jewel pay-per-view event on October 31st, Halloween. It'll be at 1 p.m. on the WWE Network, and if you ever watch a commercial for Crown Jewel, which I can't imagine there's a lot of, you will see that they don't tell you where it's from. Usually they'll say live from Philadelphia, or wherever it is they are. This one's in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and that's the reason they're not telling you where it is, because WWE has like a 10-year deal with the Saudi Arabian Athletic Commission or something like that, to basically promote Saudi Arabia as like a good place. And I mean, I don't know if you read the news, but you can tell that WWE is probably not happy that they have to put over Saudi Arabia so much, but they've kind of eliminated from their lexicon that country's name. So, it's still like a $10 million check for one show. So I assume Brock will get $1 million and Kane will get $1 million, and they'll go on their way. But they also have like a team Ric Flair and team Hulk Hogan thing going. So it's clear they're catering to the Prince, who's a big old wrestling fan. He's actually asked for older wrestlers to appear on the shows that are deceased now. So they had to let him know that that's not possible. Yokozuna is dead. He can't be on the show. But, so it kind of shows they're playing, they're catering to a madman to make some money, which at the end of the day will help the company. But it's just such a bad look. So, with that in mind, with Kane and Brock being in, another country and stuff, the titles aren't going to change. Like, Kane's not going to win. Now, if they do a rematch, that'll be interesting. We'll see how that goes, because I really am not an advocate for that. They also have Tyson Fury feuding with Braun Strowman right now, and that is rumored to be in Saudi Arabia as well, but I'm not too sure if that's the case yet. So, what'd you ask me? You asked me, will Kofi get another championship run?
Yeah.
Will they kind of go in this direction?
Sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, I think they're going to do both. I think they're going to go, I think the Fox show, Friday Night SmackDown, is going to go more towards that Kane and Brock thing, and that the Raw show is going to be more towards the, well, here's the guys we know you want to see, but we can't put them on television because Vince doesn't think that they are supposed to be on broadcast television. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, I know, I understand what you mean.
It's like I really think that the shows are going to get their own identity.
It was just a thought that I had because I remember back when Finn Balor had that injury. And, after he won the Universal Championship, and never truly got that rematch. I was just curious if something like that was going to happen to Kofi, or if he was just going to sort of fade out of obscurity in that sense. And I would hate for that to happen.
Rematch with Brock, but I don't think it'll be for much. I think I think they might throw him a pity 5-10 minute match to give us what we actually wanted. But at this point, I think it really was. I mean, as big as this week was, it was like a reset for everything. Wrestling fans need to adjust their expectations because everything that we knew is no longer what it is. Like 1 week ago, there were like there were 3 WWE shows on television and no competition, and now one's on a major network, one's on a major cable network, and one is in the middle of a war. So you literally have 3 different processes of thinking, but one man trying to do all of that. So that's kind of why you see some of the product lacking. But at the end of the day, I think that each show is going to have its own direction to be all part of the same universe, but separate things within it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. No, I understand.
And the other thing that you just made me think of is I mentioned that, people were really upset with The Fiend not winning the Universal Championship against Seth Rollins at Hell in a Cell last night. And Fightful.net, actually, if you don't know Fightful.net and you're a wrestling fan, I really recommend you checking them out. Sean Rossap is like the editor there, and he's a must follow on Twitter, especially wrestling Twitter. But he actually reported today that I guess Vince McMahon last night was all Vince McMahon's like vision, and there was talent backstage. And obviously the people in the crowd were so upset that they started chanting refund, started chanting AEW, that everyone was pretty much not happy with what had just happened. And Vince was sitting there laughing at the fans for reacting this way. So, hey, maybe he's got a master plan. Like maybe this will all work out. I've seen wrestling fans go into a tizzy about things. And, I have to say, calm down. It's part of a bigger thing. You will get the payoff that you wanted in the end. But I think that this is the wrong way of going about it. And, it's one of the things that I point to, that Vince is a little bit out of touch with what the current product needs. So we've talked a lot today, and I'll wrap things up on wrestling there. Chase, you want to let the people know where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, so you guys can find me on Twitter at Chase Sussex. I'm going to be hopefully trying to be active a little bit more over there. Just doing some stuff and promoting my other podcasts mainly, including also this one as well. But promoting my other podcast in Hockeytown Rundown. Obviously, the Red Wings are starting their season this year, and this is our first full season with Jay and I at the helm of this podcast. So we're really excited to bring you guys content. We have a new episode going up this week. We also have a bonus episode going up. We're interviewing Max Boltman from The Athletic again this week. It's actually tonight as the time of recording. So look out for that. We have a couple more collaborations coming up as well that are a little bit top secret right now. But we're really excited for sort of the future of that podcast and looking forward to it. So if you guys are Red Wings fans, you guys should be sure to check that out.
Yeah, that's the Hockeytown Rundown, right?
Yes, Hockeytown Rundown.
And you guys can catch me on Twitter at David Rosenberg. That's with 2 G's, ROSENBERGG. And make sure that you're following our main site's Twitter at MichSportsN, at MICH Sports ENT. Of course, that gives you all of the articles and everything that's going on at MichiganSportsAndEntertainment.com, which is our home site. And I've started a new podcast. If you like that wrestling segment that we just talked about, and you think that you want to hear more about the weekly things, maybe you don't want to watch the shows. We will review the shows, and we will tell you what happened, and we will hit on all the most important parts. I think Dustin, one of our writers and editors on the site, MichiganSportsAndEntertainment.com, he is doing the podcast with me. I have a couple of other people that have said that they'll be doing episodes, so it'll be kind of rotating. and we don't have a set number per week. We definitely try to do a Wednesday night episode for those Wednesday night wars. But right now we're doing about 2 episodes, 3 episodes a week, depending on when we feel it's important to talk about a certain thing. So we will be recording an episode tonight covering what happens on Monday Night Raw and all of the fallout from Hell in a Cell, including a Hell in a Cell review, which I'm sure you won't want to miss, because if you thought I sounded upset here, I'm allowed to curse on the other show. So that tends to get pretty heated. So if you want to follow that one, make sure you're following at MSE Pro Wrestling or at Dave B. Rosenberg with 2 G's. I made a second Twitter, and that's for the other Wrestling Dave's podcast, which is my new podcast. So check that out. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Peace.